We've got about 19,000 employees. About 8,000 to 9,000 reside in Iowa. The rest are outside of Iowa. About 3,000 of them reside in the international marketplace, whether that's Europe, whether that's China, whether that's Mexico, Canada, and soon India in a bigger way. We have 6 formal subsidiaries, 3 in Europe, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. We have 1 in China, 1 in Singapore, and 1 in Australia. Of those 6, 5 of them report to me, so I have a lot of insights as to what's going on from the global perspective as a result of that. We also have a tremendous number of limited liability companies, partnerships, formal legal structures with international companies to help try to prosecute the international marketplace where a subsidiary alone may not have made the most sense. Who do we sell to? We sell to original equipment manufacturers, OEMs. That can be a Boeing, that can be an Airbus, French, European. We sell to the business jet manufacturers, Bombardier, Cessna, Raytheon, Dassault, etc. We sell to basically all the ministries that the United States will allow us to export to. United Kingdom, India soon, Australia, etc., etc., etc. Wherever we got a friend, we're able to, a political friend, we're able to export our product to on the defense side. We sell to all the airlines, the users. Every country has at least one airline, I can assure you. In some cases, it's as much a point of pride and national recognition as it is economic sense, but nonetheless, every country has at least one airline. And we sell to the end user, sometimes beyond Boeing and Airbus. We also sell to the regional jet users, although they're not so prevalent in the international marketplace, in large part because of distances that they need to travel. And we also sell to the business jet operators. And there are more and more business jet operators every day, more and more reaching outside of the United States, in large part because of all of the hassles associated with security and the time efficiency that it has when you can be able to go from point A to point B without having to put up with airlines and all the infrastructure. So that's a little bit of who we are. Hopefully I didn't bore you. Hopefully I educated you a little bit. Hopefully you gained a little appreciation that we are, in fact, a global company residing in all places, eastern Iowa. And we rely on you as a great source of talent to be able to help propagate and promote our presence in that market. Now, again, what I wanted to try to do today is just touch on some really simple things. You'll probably look at the list at the end and go, well, duh. But the matter of fact is, these are things that I believe are tried and true based on many, many years of experience in the marketplace. The reality is, I'm going to start with number 1. You have to be global. If you are a corporation of any significant size today, you have to be global. Whether you're going to go prosecute that market for your own business purposes or whether you have to look at it as a competitive threat, you have to be thinking globally all the time. You all are probably more than familiar with the numbers. I'm not going to belittle them. Today, the United States ranks number 1 in gross national product or gross domestic product, with the Asian region being a close follower. But in 5 years, those numbers are going to inverse. And Asia at large, to include China, which is a big driver behind that, is going to be the number 1 gross domestic product producer in the world. The growth rates of gross domestic products are huge in the Asian region, not so much so in the United States. In fact, I don't think that we necessarily project to be in the top 5 as we look forward. Our contribution to the labor pool, 6% was the number that was given to me going into this presentation today. 6% of all the jobs come out of the United States. Boy, where do the other 94 come from? Global. So you have to be a global company. And it's not just exporting product necessarily. You have to understand it from a competitive standpoint, from a sourcing of resources standpoint, from a market exploitation standpoint. All of them demand that you at least have some appreciation and an affinity for a global market. Number 1. Number 2, you can't be globally without acting globally. And that does mean things have to be different. And how you necessarily position your company, how you expend and deploy your resources physically or through transportation, understanding contracting and all the varying laws that are required, understanding U.S. law to be able to export. You can't just go into the global market thinking, well, I'll just ship something to a different zip code. It's more than that, and you have to have a lot of depth of understanding. Tax issues, all those kind of implications come into play. Everything takes longer than you think. I don't care whether you plan it out and you add pad in it thinking it's going to be slower. I can guarantee you can add another pad that you can't foresee. Whether it's the bureaucracy, whether it's getting cultural alignment and understanding, whether it's solid communications and knowing what you're going to do, nothing is originally planned, and I can tell you in dealing business in the international market, time is one of those variables. And I'll pick one that we're very near and dear to, the Airbus A380. Everybody heard of it? Largest commercial airliner to be manufactured in the world in history. Airbus had grandiose ambitions about when that was going to roll out. Singapore Air, I believe, or Qatar is one of the first two airlines that's going to take ownership of that airplane. I think it's at least 2 years late. Now think of the amount of expense that Airbus has had to go through to manage the studies that are required to keep that program moving forward, and all the troubles that it's had to go labor its way through. A lot of money at stake, usually not very well planned. That extra 2 years cost Airbus $25 billion. Big dollar. That's a B. Big numbers. So you got to plan that as you're dealing with those kind of dynamics. Be cautious of your intellectual property. It's easy to say, and I know firsthand experience. We've taken a product that we thought was a hot seller. We put it out into the international marketplace after it had already been adopted by the United States Armed Forces. We thought, boy, it's U.S. branded, it's U.S. supported. It'll surely sell in the domestic or in the international market. We put it out at a trade show. As is sometimes the case, you lock the stuff up, but the security around a trade show isn't maybe what you'd like it to be. You get there the next morning, the product is gone, and 1 year later, you see a competing firm of international origin with a product that looks exactly like yours. It happens all the time. If you don't think industrial espionage goes on, you're crazy. It does all of the time. And candidly, French, Israelis, Chinese, Russians, they're the best at it. They are absolutely the best at it. They have people who are on a mission to gather that kind of information. And in our area of expertise and the work that we do, a large part of it being defense-oriented, that's critical back to the national security of our country. So, big deal. The other compounding fact that sometimes gets overlooked about intellectual property is that where do you go to try to reconcile the damage in a court of law? Most foreign countries do not have the foundational law and the timing of that and effectiveness of that law to have any real effect. The damage is done. And chances are you're going to be trapped in courts forever and ever and ever. The only person that's going to win in the deal is the lawyer. And frankly, that's not an attractive proposition. So you're better to just protect your intellectual property, milk it out based on where you think you need to be from a competitive standpoint. Don't show your best on your first blush. You cannot communicate enough. My experience, in large part in Asia, probably more than anything because of the language barrier, you'll get a lot of yes. And you think, if you didn't have a lot of experience, that meant they understood and agreed. Doesn't mean that at all. It just means they're being polite. What I have also found is, and this is especially true again in Asia, if I have a plan, I've got an idea, you've got a need, they come together and we form a contract. That contract has a baseline. It has terms and conditions. It has a statement of work that defines how I'm programmatically going to manage the program. It also has a technical specification that articulates the performance of the product at the end. It has a schedule and it has a cost. kind of the basic 5 elements of any contract. I don't know of any contract, as I alluded to earlier, that stays the course exactly to the letter of the law as was originally planned. Somebody decides they want the shade of blue a little darker, so the technical spec gets modified. We got to change the shade of blue. Well, I need it sooner than I thought, so the schedule gets accelerated. Well, I may claim that you've introduced a change over and above the requirement, and I want an equitable adjustment, therefore the cost changes. So always a contract is a living document. In the United States, and in large part in Europe, we understand what the original plan is to execute all of the elements of that contract. And if at any point in time that contract changes, we know where we are today and where it needs to change and how it needs to change to be able to execute the work. And so we just pick up from time now and modify the contract to reflect the forward work under the new plan. In Asia, that doesn't work. And I don't know why. It's culture, I presume. In Asia, my experience has been is you got to go back to day one. All that work's been completed, yet you have to plan it and document it all again on paper. And it causes us, at least in our company, wait a minute, we don't understand. We're past all that. That's history. You can't change history. They want it to all be replanned and negotiated again. Saying, that's not part of the deal. We're going to start from time today, moving forward. That concept does not resonate well in the Asian marketplace, at least in the markets that we serve. So communicate, 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 communicate. That's the message. You can't do it enough. You can't write it down enough. You can't talk it through enough. You just can't communicate enough. Technology is making the process easier. I don't have to travel across the globe as much as I used to. I can actually do it through electronic media. I can literally do work 24 hours a day because of technology if I have common tools, common processes, a common sense and understanding of what needs to be accomplished with common goals that motivate people. I can use technology to my advantage, both in the market, trying to prosecute an opportunity, as well as in trying to develop a capability going forward. So we think technology is a good thing, and it's going to make the world, and is making the world, a much smaller place. You can't be draconian. What's that mean? I thought he said simple. Let me give you an example. We bought a company in Germany about 18 months ago in Heidelberg. As are most companies in Germany in particular, but I think across Europe at large, given there is a socialist bent about their countries, France and Germany in particular, each employment has a work council. We would think of it as a union. But it's not as organized as, say, the UAW is. But every company has one. They're company specific. You cannot do a whole lot with that company in terms of driving productivity unless you get the work council's consent. And that is political maneuvering, believe me. They can say no just as easy as they can say yes, and it all be on a whim, all be based on a personality. So to go in with a U.S. bottom line business corporate mentality and say, I'm going to drive productivity into this organization by changing processes, eliminating people, leaning out my whole facility and my factory, not going to happen in Germany, not easily. Not going to happen in France, not going to happen in the UK, again, based on our experience. You want to go in and you want to lay people off. I buy a company. I've got to go find some synergies to be able to pay for the premium that I had to pay for that company. That synergy comes in the form of revenue or cost synergy. Revenue synergy is basically taking my capability plus the acquired capability and creating more value than the sum of the two. 1 + 1 = 3. Very hard to achieve. Cost synergy is easy. I take out heads. You got an accounting department, I got an accounting department. We'll take them out, one of them out. You can't do that in the international marketplace very easily because the rules and the laws don't let you do it. You've got to pay the government a fee to lay somebody off because they, in turn, are going to have to subsidize that person while they're not employed. Oh, by the way, they're going to be unemployed for a good long while when unemployment rates are in the 10, 15% in some places in Europe. So big time problems, and you can't just go in there and think, geez, I'm a U.S. company, productivity is what I'm all about. I just make the investment and I'll clean it all back up through draconian actions. That doesn't work that way. Every region is different. Europe is clearly by far more like us. Western Europe, Eastern Europe, not so much. Asia is altogether different than the Middle East, which is different than the European community. Not one of them is better, not one of them is worse. They're all different. And that's the thing you need to understand, is what are those differences? How do you deal with those differences? And then you manage your way through them. I will tell you the one constant in them all is relationships. U.S. is very pushy. We want to get stuff done now. We're on a schedule. My gosh, I got my BlackBerry. I got my cell phone. I'm ready to go. Take an order, on to the next customer. You can't do that in the international marketplace. You really can't. You have to spend time and develop a relationship. If you're going to do business in Asia, you better learn karaoke. And I got to tell you, that is the worst thing I've ever had to do is karaoke. But if you don't do karaoke in Asia, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, China, you've made a mistake. You've made a huge mistake. Because they believe that the best way to know a person is see them at their weakest moment and how they react. And I got to tell you, for me, karaoke is my weakest moment. But they see you take that step. You make that overture to their culture, just like we would reciprocate if they wanted to go to a baseball game. If they didn't want to go to a baseball game, you'd say, I don't know if I like that person. And people like to do business with people they like. It's that fundamentally simple. We're all the same in that regard. So relationship, relationship, relationship. And it creates tremendous opportunity and, frankly, a lot of personal satisfaction. When you don't know, seek help. You can't guess in the international marketplace. There are plenty of avenues to get information, whether it's understanding the laws, whether it's understanding the cultures, whether it's understanding the bureaucracy and the processes by which a company or a country does business. All of that is fundamental to being successful. And it's all available to you if you just go seek it out. But don't guess your way through it. You will fail. There are consultants. There are representatives that you can hire that actually live, have relationships, speak the language, etc. They are fundamentally mandatory in my way of thinking. It's expensive to put an expat in country, an American located in an international country. You're better off many times to go find somebody you can trust to do that. They're out there, they're available. The internet presents a tremendous amount of information on what's going on in a country. Analysts, stock analysts, people who judge countries and companies across the globe, their job is to do research and report that research to prospective shareholders. That information is free. Take advantage of it. They have as much insight and are as current as any person going on. They have to be, because what they're doing is recommending a country and a company to do business with and have their customers, investors, put money there. So they have to be right. If they're not, they don't stay in business very long. That's all free information. The last item, not the last, but the top 10 for me, leadership is the key. If you don't have a leader in your organization that believes in international and understands the differences and personally engages, you have a tough time as a company succeeding. It's hard to do from the bottoms up. It costs more, it takes longer, it requires a much greater commitment and focus, and if you can't sell that up the chain, you got a problem. Whereas if you've got a leader who absolutely believes it and personally demonstrates that commitment, then it is much easier as you flow down. And that is equally important in the internal side of a company as it is in terms of the external perception. As an example, in my side of the business, which is the government piece, I was relaying to Jim earlier. Can you imagine a minister of defense in a country, let's pick the UK, standing before the Parliament of the United Kingdom and explaining that a multi-million-dollar program, hundreds of million-dollar program is going to go to a United States company versus an indigenous company in the UK. That person had better have the utmost commitment from that company that they're going to perform and that they offer better, greater value for the services desired than the UK company. Otherwise, the political football starts to get into the way of the decision. And Parliament ultimately will pass judgment on whether that program should, in fact, be awarded per the recommendation. So you have to be able to sit in front of the minister and talk to them about your commitment, your understandings of their need, your corporate resources that are going to be employed, whether that's in the country or in the States, doesn't matter. All of those things are critically important, and we wouldn't be successful if we didn't do that in a big way. Those are my 10. They're pretty straightforward, pretty simple. I think they're paramount to being successful. I know it's not on the academic plane or the theoretical or the philosophical plane that you're sometimes asked to listen to or read about during the class, but practicality is kind of what I'm about, and I don't profess to be an academic. I don't profess to be philosophical. I just know what I know through lots of hard work and lots of experience, and these are things that are tried and true. What does it mean to you? Accept them. Don't fight them, accept them. He said communicate, but he probably didn't really mean that. I meant it. Communicate. You can't do it enough. At any opportunity that you have to broaden your exposure, whether you think you will use it or not, take advantage of it. If anything, you'll gain personally. But in all probability, you will gain professionally as well. No matter what discipline you're in, whether it's engineering, finance, operations, legal, doesn't matter. In any opportunity you have, take advantage of it. And before you go, and I know this sounds trite, but to make a little effort to understand, I will tell you, the ability to be in China, and when somebody does a favor for you or performs a service and you say, "Xie xie," that means a lot. And people go, "God, that person made an effort to understand my language." Bonjour. All of those little things mean something. Don't shake an Arab, or don't touch an Arab with a left hand. All of those little things will make you more successful, and it will demonstrate as much as anything that you've made an effort to try to understand them as people, as a culture, as a country, and as a company. And it will improve your success. Summarize, and I really want to encourage you to ask questions, those both here in the room, and I understand we got some people off campus that have that same ability, so be thinking now. I've tried to carve off as much time as I can for just that point. First point I'd make, it is hard. It sounds fun, it sounds glamorous, but, take a 14-hour flight to Singapore, get off the airplane and be expected to meet and perform a negotiation with a customer only who wants to take you out late at night and take you to a fine restaurant, sing some karaoke, and chug a few bottles of whatever native drink they may advocate. That makes for a long, long day. They sometimes do that on purpose, too, so don't underestimate their motives. That is an act of negotiation and is widely applied. Take advantage of an American while they're on travel, and they got time lag, and they're not accustomed to the good food or something like that. It is worth it. Business-wise, I think the numbers say you have to go, as I alluded to earlier, but personally as well. It's very, very satisfying, and I think I know when my day comes, one of the fondest memories I will have are part of my international experience and being able to broaden the culture. And I'm a guy who, for formative years grew up in eastern Iowa, went to Iowa State University, never thought that frankly, there was an international. The Mississippi and the Missouri were the oceans in my way of thinking growing up. I've been enlightened, and I relish every opportunity I get to go. Lastly, it requires a ton of leadership, a ton of communications, and candidly, just some open-mindedness. And if you apply all those principles and you persevere, I think the worth will pay for itself. That's my simple story. What I'd really rather do is spend the time asking or answering your questions. And so if somebody wants to just get the ball rolling, I think that usually is the case. It will go extremely well.
We'd like to go ahead and get started with a question that came in earlier from our off-campus students. Going back to what you were talking about in regard to intellectual property, he brings up the fact that the U.S. Senate recently passed stricter laws and policies against patents and intellectual property. He asks, do you see this as a good or bad thing for U.S. businesses?
Ask the question again, please, or make the point again.
Okay. The U.S. Senate recently passed strict rules against patents and intellectual property. Do you see this as a good or bad thing for U.S. businesses?
Do I think restricting patents via law is a bad thing for industry? General question. Yes. And I say that from a very company-oriented perspective. We as a company make substantial investments in our products and our capabilities. And for that capability, or in return for that capability, we want to protect it for a period of time. We realize it will be obsolete in many instances given the nature and evolution of technology. But by and large, we want to be protected by law through the patent process. Now, if they're going to restrict my ability to get a patent, then my technology becomes much more available to be taken and used against me. So I basically fund somebody else's success. In principle, I got a problem with that. Simple terms. Question over here?
I've got a... Oh, no, I don't. And we're going to go right over here.
Okay, kind of related to this, your comments just now and earlier regarding industrial espionage. Do you think the amount of industrial espionage is going to decrease or increase with the current trends in the marketplace?
Increase, definitely. Question was basically, do I think industrial espionage will increase or decrease? I don't think there's any question it's an increase, in large part because we're competing more on a global front. So the companies and countries that we're dealing with are much more prevalent than they've ever been. And as a consequence, their desire and need for technology is as great as ours. And they have chosen, not to suggest we have or haven't. I mean, I can speak for our company, have not. But that's a fine line, too. We're always trying to understand what the competitor's doing. Now, that's not to say necessarily we will take their property, intellectual property, and use it. But we're always trying to understand it and where it's directed to go. The one unique thing I think about our industry at large is it's becoming more and more commercial IT oriented. And so we are not as dependent on our own development of technology as we used to. We rely on the Intels of the world to provide and fuel that technology. So frankly, they're the ones that are probably at greater risk than we, although in the military market we do have to provide security and those attributes around our product that we believe are competitive discriminators. So yes, the answer is we see it more and more often. Yes?
What kind of effort do you guys go through to protect your intellectual property in the international market?
Considerable, more than I ever remember in 27 years in terms of the efforts we deploy to try to protect our IP. First off, I guess legal recourse, patents. We've probably tripled the number of patents that we generate today versus what we did 5 years ago. And I would venture to guess as we look forward, we will do the same. Now, we do it for two reasons. One is the obvious, that is, I want to protect the investment I made in the technology to maintain a competitive discriminator against my competition. But two, we have come to know that service has become an ever-increasing element of revenue in our business. And if I am casual with my intellectual property, that suggests that somebody can use that intellectual property to then service my product after the sale. And we have found that we would just as soon hold that proprietary to us, forcing our customers to come back to us to be able to get that service revenue. And frankly, in our market, service revenue from a profitability standpoint is substantially higher. You can exercise leverage. The swap cost is usually greater than the repair and maintenance and service cost, and yet I've got them captive. So I want to leverage that as long and as much as I can. We used to sell, as an example, airlines who historically have had large infrastructures, which is why the United States Airlines market is in the financial struggles that it is. It has too much cost built into its business, and that's why low-cost carriers are doing well, because they've chosen not to pursue that path. But airlines used to, as part of that infrastructure, they wanted to maintain all of the equipment on their airplanes so they could provide what they claimed was top-notch service. I could turn an airplane around, dump passengers off, pick new ones off, and I'd get more flights out per day. And in order to do that, they felt like they had to control the value chain to include the service element. So what they would ask us to do is buy test equipment. We would give them the test equipment, so when a box showed a failure, they would pull it off the airplane, plug it into the test equipment. It would either say, yes, it's a real failure, and they'd fix it themselves, or they would confirm it wasn't a failure. Now they're starting to realize, or we realized that was a revenue stream only for the test equipment. What we didn't fully appreciate was that repair could come back to us if we didn't sell them the equipment. And the repair over time is greater than the value of the test equipment on a one-time deal. So we retain our intellectual property in large part because it gives us revenue and leverage in the market. That's the other reason why we are much more conscious about IP.
I had a question about, you talked about doing business with countries that there aren't trade restrictions against. Has there ever been an instance, or if not, maybe hypothetically, if there were trade restrictions brought against a country you already have contracts with, what would happen to those outstanding contracts?
Well, each contract has a provision in it in the international marketplace that says subject to U.S. law. Likewise, it says also subject to whatever country's law. If either country politically puts a sanction down, then you have kind of a force majeure, kind of a clause that escapes you from any further liabilities. Now, our desire is to be able to anticipate that stuff through our presence in Washington, know what the mood of a country is. And I will tell you, more and more and more, this country has elected to try to put down heavy restrictions. And those countries know that. So their propensity and willingness to buy from the United States is already factored into their thought process in the selection. And that is one of the toughest challenges I have on the government market. What assurances do I have that the United States isn't going to drop their hammer on me? And so in many instances what we do is, and that's why we have subsidiaries, that's why we have partnerships, we will do that through the arm of our subsidiary and let them handle the technology development. That's why we bought the German company. We did not think as a United States company we could compete effectively against a German company or an Eastern Bloc company by doing that from the United States. There was a political bias and there was an apprehension about the United States and its political stance in the Middle East. And the Germans, you'll remember, were not big advocates of the war in Iraq. So they felt concerned about whether or not we would transfer technology to them. So what we said was, we'll buy a company and we'll do all the development through them. It's a German job, it's a German technology, it meets your needs, and through the accounting world, we get service revenue for it, or revenue for it. So that's a way around that. But you anticipate that stuff typically. Most of that stuff builds up over a period of time. It's not draconian. Questions on the outer lines?
Yeah, we have another question from one of our off-campus students. Are there any international antitrust laws that prohibit monopolistic behavior?
To the contrary, I'd say they almost encourage it. Are there any antitrust laws that prohibit monopolistic behavior? Many of the Chinese companies that you might compete with or you work with, they're government owned. By definition, it's a monopoly. In Europe, they don't have enough base in and of themselves, at least in our market, to develop enough critical mass. As an example, the French buy 50 fighters. You can't build a fighter when the market's only 50. So what they do is form the European Aerospace and Defense, I can't remember what the S stands for, EADS. And they basically are a collection of all of the aerospace and defense companies that are made up in Europe. They form a corporation. It's all work share and allocated. It's the craziest structure you've ever seen in your life. It is so hamstrung by all the political influences that it can't make a decision for its life. And at the end of the day, it's liable for, on a work share basis, for all of the expenses incurred. Airbus is a division of EADS, as is Eurofighter, as is Eurocopter, as is Alenia. But they all fall under the monopoly of EADS. And that monopoly is all of the aerospace and defense firms that are made up in Europe. There really aren't a lot in the Middle East. However, I would tell you there is huge political influence. In my market, if you're a retired general in the Saudi Air Force, you've got a guaranteed job for a Selsan. It's a company that's basically promoted by the government. And if you are of general officer status, it's almost a fait accompli that you will end up there if you choose. That's all. And work is directed to a Selsan to try to keep that club employed, I guess, is probably the best way. I think of that as a monopoly. It may not be a monopoly in traditional definitions by U.S. standards, but it's clearly a monopoly in terms of how it operates. There was a question that was right here.
Please name 5 of your biggest competitors worldwide. And the second question is, everybody pretty much have an access to same human resources in those days due to globalization. And what makes the real difference in between competitors and different, where we are getting those different differences in today's world? Thank you.
Let me make sure I understood the question. First, name my 5 competitors. And then secondly, from a people resource perspective, how do I discriminate against those competitors in terms of...
Yeah, what makes the difference? What, people, all the companies need to compete. And you have all the same human resources pretty much. What makes the difference?
My historical competitors, we think of ourselves as a Tier 2 company. Tier 1 would be a Boeing and an Airbus. They actually make the airplane. We provide subsystems to the airplane. So in that context, my Tier 2 competitors, in general terms, Honeywell would probably be number 1. Thales, it's a French company, I should say a European company with its headquarters in Paris, number 2. Elbit, an Israeli company based out of Haifa, Israel, number 3. I can say on the government, Raytheon, number 4. Parts of Raytheon I supply to, parts of Raytheon supply to me, and parts of Raytheon I compete with. But in general terms, Raytheon would be 1. And interestingly enough, Boeing. And I say Boeing because on the government side, I compete, I partner, I supply to Boeing. On the commercial side, it's purely I supply to them relationship. But Boeing on the military side is running out of airplanes to build. And so what are they doing to continue to grow? Because their shareholders are asking them to grow, just like my shareholders are. And so what are they going to do if they can't build more airplanes? They're going to move down the value chain into the system and subsystems integration realm. I am a box provider historically, and my boxes are moving from hardware orientation to software orientation. They're getting smaller, lighter, and cheaper along the way. I can sell more today of what I used to sell yesterday and make less money because of technology. So what do I have to do to satisfy my shareholder? I have to move up the food chain, or I have to move into adjacent markets horizontally. And frankly, to cover our bases, we're trying to do both. So I am now rubbing elbows with Boeing. Not a very comfortable place to be when they're a $50+ billion enterprise and I'm a $4 billion enterprise. But that's where we get into competitive discrimination. How do I beat the other guy? I would argue against a Boeing, I'm more affordable. I'm more nimble, I'm smaller, I can move faster than they can. And I'm cheaper because of that. That's a discriminator. Part of my discrimination is my ability to provide technology to market at the right time. Part of it is understanding and anticipating the problem before my customer does. That's what I need to do to be successful as a systems integrator. I think I am getting better at doing that on a daily basis. Better than my Tier 2 competitors. The question is, can I be better at it than my Tier 1 competitor who's moving down the value chain? And those are the challenges that I have. Am I better with my people and my responsiveness? Am I better with my service offerings? All of those are really competitive discriminators. In many cases, it's depending on the nature of the program, the country, the pursuit, the product. I don't know that there is one answer to what is my overarching competitive advantage. I think it's a collection of all of them. And customers weigh all of them. What I'm finding more and more and more is my customer wants value. They used to shop for price. They don't do that anymore. They tend to shop for value. And just like you and I, if my car breaks and I take it down to the service guy and the guy says it's going to be ready on Tuesday and it's going to cost $300 to repair, and I show up on Tuesday having gone through all the inconvenience of not having had transportation for a week, and the guy tells me it's not ready, and oh, by the way, when it is, it'll be $500, I'm not going to go there ever again. But if that customer or that supplier, that mechanic, says it'll be ready on Tuesday and it'll cost $400 as compared to the $300 I had before, and on Monday I get the call and says the car's ready and it's still $400, I'm going to shop with that guy every time from now on. And I'm going to tell all my friends about it because I got value for it. I got timeliness, I got better than anticipated timeliness, and I got consistency on the price. And he got the car fixed. Got the car fixed. I don't want to take that risk of it maybe being a week late and $200 more than what the guy said it was. And I think that's what our business world is all about. It's those basic principles that you and I deal with when we make consumer decisions. It's value. You're going to buy a $5 meal or a $15 meal. Depends what you value. Do you look at food as subsistence, or do you relish the experience and you're willing to pay for the ambiance and the service and the quality? That's a personal decision. And you have to understand your market well enough to be able to find how you want to tailor your offering to create competitive discrimination. It's a complex question. I don't know if I confused you with my answer. I don't think there is an answer that's canned in a blanket way, I guess is my point. Jim. Oh, I'm sorry. One off the offsite?
Yep, one more question from our off-campus students. Does Rockwell Collins have an employee program such that each of its employees have the opportunity to learn and act globally? If not, do you have a vision of what corporations should do to encourage intellect and global vision amongst employees?
Historically, nothing formal. It's been tribal knowledge. It's knowing the right person that has some international responsibility. And if you pal up to them and they pick you for a project, then you get some exposure. And then you, in turn, train somebody else along the way. It's kind of tribal knowledge. That's the historic way. But we've come to recognize as a company, as I think many other companies have as well, that tribal knowledge isn't enough. We can't find enough engineers to satisfy our needs. Today, we have 425 open requisitions for engineers. We need them tomorrow. That's the kind of growth we're growing through. We cannot satisfy that solely through Iowa State University as much as we would like. We can't solve that through Purdue or any of the other major aerospace firms, so we have to go outside. So our people have to understand how to go outside, and then when you go outside, how do you manage the cultural differences, the leadership skill development requirements, managing across geographic sites, understanding the laws and regulations relative to both employment and technology transfer. All of those things we have to put structure around, because doing it the ad hoc tribal way isn't going to get us there. We are highly encouraging people to take rotations. If you want international experience in our company, we will fund that under some certain provisions. We can't do that for everybody because we don't have enough slots overseas, and it is an expensive proposition, but we are spending money in a very conscious, methodical way. I will tell you that organizationally, we as a company are going to set up a complete international organization to try to give people in the international domain a sense that they have a career path. One of the struggles that we have, and I think all U.S. companies have, is if you're headquartered in the United States and you are a European employee or an Asian employee, how do you get ahead? What is the top? And do I have to make the move to Cedar Rapids? Historically, we said yes. If you wanted to be a senior vice president of our corporation, you had to move to Mecca. Mecca being Cedar Rapids. Well, that is discouraging to some people, because if I'm foreign and I want to be a senior vice president and I don't want to move to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, how do I get ahead? Well, you wouldn't in the past. In the future, we will have an organizational structure that at the pinnacle of that will be a senior vice president, which is a corporate officer, and that will be an avenue to get there. Now, if you want to be the CEO, you got to move to Mecca, but because you only got one of those, and we are headquartered in Cedar, and I believe we will be for the foreseeable future, my foreseeable future anyway. Question? Yes.
You said that you guys are. Oh, sorry. You said you guys are involved with a lot of foreign governments. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, to what extent are you involved in lobbying foreign governments to change their spending practices on defense type things?
Every day. That's what we do. That's what a business development person is really set up to try to go make happen. Shape the requirement or the evaluation process to favor our company so that those strategic advantages and discriminators that we talked about earlier get weighed into the evaluation in a way that I can win. And so we are constantly working, both domestically, through our Washington office and talking to people in the Pentagon, on the Hill, in the service commands themselves, the COMCOs, the guys that actually are out in the field fighting the war. What are your needs? What do you want? I can get it to you sooner. You want it green? What shade of green? I mean, all of those things are things that we work and massage all the time. And we do it just as much internationally. Now, it's harder internationally because we're viewed as an American. So, what do? You go employ a European or an Asian or a Middle Easterner or an African or a South American to try to do that on your behalf. And they become representatives of your company when they do that. Again, what it all boils down to is value. Here's, what do you want? And am I the best person to give it to you? And always above board. I mean, I don't mean to suggest in any way it's anything less than that. But that's really how you win business at large. Understanding understanding the problem, understanding the decision makers, understanding what the decision makers view to be the most important thing on their list in a priority order and how they're going to weigh it and evaluate it. Understanding where your competition is relative to those most important requirements, and then developing a strategy to either counter their advantage or leverage my advantage. And in some cases, neutral is okay. And then it becomes a choice of, did you answer the mail correctly? And if you did all those things correctly, you should win. And that's what it's all about. It's winning. We keep score with money. Now, that's not true. And that's one of the appreciations that you need to have. That is not true necessarily in the international marketplace. In the international marketplace, what is sometimes the motivation other than money? That's a question. Jobs. If I'm a country that's got a 15% employment rate, I don't really care if the company makes money. I want to make sure they get the work because they'll employ people that takes them off the tax payroll. So I'm competing in many instances where I have a shareholder as a U.S. company, and we get measured quarterly based on our returns, and we can get killed or we can get boosted up based on how well we do on each quarter, and I got to make a profit. I may be competing against a company in a country that doesn't have to make a profit. So how do I win in the cost advantage? Well, I got to find different discriminators than price to be able to pull that off. Or I got to offset their political advantage by creating jobs in country as well. Again, why we bought the German company. So those are the dynamics we have to deal with. Question over here in the yellow jacket. And anybody who may be on the outer internet, whatever the means is, be thinking of other ones. Yes?
How do you, as an individual, keep up with all the changes in laws, regulations, market needs, and competitor technologies in your industry, and contribute to how your company can stay ahead of all of it?
How do I keep attuned with the environment around me and all the dynamics attendant to it? Well, I have a staff, and I have people who are assigned the responsibility of understanding what goes on. Those people employ all the same resources I alluded to earlier: consultants, representatives, dealers, internet, stock market analysts, the customer themselves. The best way is to get out in the marketplace. That is absolutely the best way. And me personally, I rely on my staff, but not totally, because we tend to look at the world through our own glasses, and we interpret things through our own glasses and our own experiences. The best way to balance those perspectives is to go talk to the customer themselves. There's no better way. Go talk to the economic advisor or the Ministry of Economy or economics in a country. What are the things you worry about on a daily basis? Again, it takes leadership to have access to those people. You know, Joe or Jane engineer down at Tier 5 in the organization probably is not going to get an appointment with the Minister of Economics in a country. But I, as a senior leader of a corporation, have a pretty good chance, typically, especially if I have a representative who's well positioned in the company, in the country, and is respected. And I can get an avenue, and it doesn't take a half hour. I can go to forums, I can go to seminars. There's all kinds of ways to keep current. The key is understanding what's important and what's not important. And that really, to my way of thinking, is experience and intuition. Does that matter? At the end of the day, you only can focus on so much, and you got to figure out what does in fact matter. And who is that ultimate customer? Because I can make a case that there are many, many customers that you deal with. In my business, it's as much the pilot as it is the service operator who, when the airplane's down on the ground and it has to get turned around with a new group of passengers, as it is the guy who works in the back shop, as it is the president of the airline. All of them are customers. The question is, which one carries the most weight? The procurement guy, the guy that actually issues the purchase order to me, he may be the very most important customer. I got to figure out which one's the most important, weigh all of their personal desires, and then understand how they're going to do the evaluation. And at the end of the day, the best way to get that is just keep asking questions. Why? 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 And they'll tell you. People like to talk. And if you ask the right question, and especially when it's about them, they'll talk forever. Yes?
Yeah, we have another question from our off-campus group. With the shortage of engineers that you mentioned, how do you continue to decrease cycle times of products?
Well, it's not just engineers that design, they all design the products, but it's not, we don't solely rely on the engineer to define our product life cycles. Architecture of our products. If I have a common architecture that I can use for multiple instantiations of that product, I can leverage a lot of reuse. And if I can get reuse out of my product, I minimize my design cycle and I can get new product out to market. Power supplies. We used to develop a unique power supply for every product we ever built. And I'm being very simplistic. Today, we don't do that. We have about 2-3 power supplies, and we mandate internally that will be the power supply of choice in any new product development. So now I've got 3 power supplies that are sitting on the shelf that I can use anytime, any place, anywhere, and there is 0 development time for that. And airplanes only generate certain kinds of power. There's not a lot of variety or variability because the airplane can't afford to generate that many types of power. Processors, operating systems, parts. We've standardized down to critical parts. As an engineer, we want you to pick this part. A, because we think it has longevity. B, we think it has capacity to do our job. C, we can get a price break because we can now consolidate with economies of scale and go to that vendor and get a better price because we can guarantee him we'll buy 10,000 of that part versus 1,000 from this guy, 1,000 from that guy, 1,000 from that guy, etc. So we control a lot of that stuff. And so those are processes, I guess, as much as anything, and disciplines that we employ to try to help compress cycle time. And at the end of the day, I think cycle time is going to become a greater and greater competitive discriminator for people. Because people have needs, and it's only when they recognize they have that need that they're willing to buy. If it takes 2 years to get them the solution to that need that they just found out about, people are getting impatient. So if I can beat to the market in 6 months or a year, then I'm going to be more effective than the other guy, and now that becomes my competitive discriminator. And it always changes depending on the nature of the problem you're trying to solve.
If I could come in with a question here. I saw in the paper today, I think, that the euro hit $1.42.
Good.
Can you give us counsel on
It helps me compete against the
why
Europeans.
that's important or not important, maybe from a country point of view and from your company point of view?
I'm not a macroeconomics guy, so I don't know that I can probably ask the prior part of your question in terms of relevance of currency. But I can tell you that from a company perspective, when currency varies, positively or negative, it can create an opportunity or a problem. Today, the euro is way more in value than the dollar, greater than I think it's ever been. What that says is that the Europeans' price just went up. Every time the euro gets to be more value than the dollar, it becomes a problem for them when competing in the United States. It's the inverse if I'm competing in Europe. So if I am a European company and the European company wants to do business in euros, and I as an American company want to compete, I'm at a disadvantage. Because the dollar isn't worth much, it takes more dollars to equal the euro, therefore my price just went up. The worst part is I've entered into an agreement, and we did it based on an assumed exchange rate, and the exchange rate varies negatively. Where does that extra money come from? It comes from the bottom line. So what do we do to deal with that? Depending on the exposure that we think we have, is you can buy hedges from banks, and we will hedge a currency at a prescribed rate. We basically lock in, like you would a mortgage if you were buying a home. You lock into the rate, and you are betting that the rate will stay at or below, or depending on above, depending on the particulars, at that number. And if it varies beyond that, well, then you're protected. It becomes the bank's exposure. Now, they charge you a fee for the risk that they incur, but sometimes that risk is worth having them carry versus me, and I'm willing to pay the money. It's all down to value. So those are the dynamics that are real time. As an example, Airbus is trying to launch the A350. They're in the process of doing it to compete against the Boeing 787. They're playing serious catch-up. Historically, the French and the EADS, the owner of Airbus, would buy European for political and jobs-related reasons that I talked about before. But because they can't afford the development because of all that $25 billion exposure they have on the A380, they are looking at the first time that I know of at using American suppliers to try to provide it because the dollar is worth less than the euro. Honeywell just won the auxiliary power unit, probably over $1 billion opportunity. Honeywell's never had a position on an Airbus airplane in the past. It's always been a European firm, Snecma, whoever the other European APU providers are. Engines, they typically buy a European engine. My guess is GE, Pratt & Whitney, Rolls-Royce will not get the job because they're going to want to quote in pounds converted to euros, and GE will quote in dollars, which will be cheaper, therefore better for Airbus at large. So, and we Collins are competing for the cockpit. I will tell you, Thales would have won that thing hands down in the last airplane because it was politically driven. Now it's economic driven. Variables have changed, and because of the economics, we think we have a chance to compete in a way that we never have before. So it is something that you have to think of, and we have a financial arm that worries about currency exchange on a daily basis. They live and breathe that. They buy currencies. They trade currencies. We take our own company investments in terms of our 401ks and the like. We have people worry about that for personnel investment reasons as well as doing business reasons. Big deal. Big deal. Yes?
I've heard you talk a couple times
The question was through not only my comments today, but other speakers. You talk about India, China, Middle East, Eastern Bloc. Nobody mentions Australia. Anybody from Australia here? I guess I can't ask the people who are remote. They can't make up their mind. That's the biggest problem that they have. Now imagine, here's a country that is roughly the size of the continental United States. 3/4 or more of the population resides on the southeast coast, starting from Melbourne, running up through Sydney, a big gap called the Gold Coast, great place to go, and then Brisbane. The rest of the country is barren, absolutely barren. I mean, hell, kangaroos don't go there. And the population, I think, in total is, and I'm going to be probably off on my numbers, but I'm going to say roughly 20 million people. We are a country of what, 300 million, just passed that threshold here recently. They don't have a lot of buying power. They have a general fear of independence. They don't want to be dependent on anybody. So everything has to be done in part in Australia because they feel like they're in the corner of the globe. Well, they are. And they don't want to rely on anybody for anything. They want independence. And so as a result, the price goes up. They are the greatest people in the world to do business with. Absolutely go have a beer. They are funny. They're enjoyable to be around. They are the hardest people in the world to do business with. Every I has got to be dotted. Every T has to be crossed. And if it's not, they've got mandatory clauses that you have to accept if you want the business that expose you to liabilities. There's a clause that's classic in Australia in our business. Suitable for use. Now, again, go back to the basics of a contract. I've got a price, I've got a schedule, I've got terms and conditions, I've got a specification, and I've got a statement of work. And those are the parameters. That's what I am obligated by the contract to deliver, except for this thing that's over in those terms and conditions called suitable for use. So, if I deliver it to you and I meet all of the parameters that are obligated by those 5 elements of the contract, and the customer comes back and says, and they have the right to under this suitable for use clause, I don't like it. I'm not going to pay you. They have that right. Now, who wants to do business with somebody like that? I mean, it's crazy. We sold them a handheld GPS set. GPS has kind of become in vogue. We're the largest supplier, probably as close to a monopoly in terms of technical capability as you can find in the Defense Department. And they come to us because we're the GPS guys. We sign the contract. Buried in there, unbeknownst to us, is that suitable for use clause. Come to find out, they take this GPS unit and they want to dive 20 feet down below the water, reel up an antenna and have it float on the water so it can track the satellite signals. And they want to be able to navigate underwater, just having the only thing exposed is an antenna about the size of a can lid floating on the surface. Well, the unit implodes because of the pressure under the water. It fills with water, shorts out all the electronics. They come back to us and says it's not suitable for use. So where in the spec did it say I have to perform at 20 feet underwater? It never said I had to do that. So they didn't pay us. I don't need that kind of business. That's candidly why the Australians are not great people to do business with. Now, that's limited to my perspective based on selling equipment into the military marketplace. Qantas Airlines. We sell a lot to Qantas. It's got one airline. They're pretty darn demanding. All those I's and all those T's got to be dotted. And oh, by the way, it's got that same suitable for use clause. So it applies in the commercial market as much as it does in the military market. And the market isn't big enough to be able to put yourself as a company in an exposed position. Great place to vacation, great people to go out and have a social experience with. Tough place to do business. And it's not big enough to worry. There are better places to go put my resources, my time, and my energy. That's an aerospace and defense perspective. And I'm probably speaking beyond other industries who may do extremely well there. But for us, not much. And frankly, if you're in any other industry, there's a small market. It's 18, 20 million people that are all crammed into a corner. Tough place to do. Plus, tough place to do business.
I think we'll stop at this point. I got two things to tell you, the class. One is that Greg's got to drive back to Cedar Rapids tonight, and the other is that he said he'd be delighted to talk to students after class. So please go down if you have a mind to, and say hi. And on the other hand, appreciate that he'll stay as long as you do, but he really has to make a drive. Greg, thank you very much. What a great presentation.
Well, hey, it's my pleasure. Hopefully you found value in my comments. Again, I didn't suggest or propose that they were highly academic or highly philosophical. They're just based on experience. I think a reasonable amount of experience. And I would highly encourage you to keep them in the back of your mind and use them every day, all day, as you start to go into your respective careers, because I think they are pan-industry. I think they're just basic dealings with the international marketplace, which is becoming ever more important. I'm thrilled as an Iowa State grad to be able to come back, and hopefully I met your needs. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.